This is episode 588 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, it was quite a busy week last week, marked most notably by the conclusion of the governor's signing period or veto period.
Oh, yeah, or lack thereof.
Yeah. We'll definitely talk a little bit about that, but I wanted to make sure listeners of this show are aware of my recent article at National Review, Rich State, Poor People, in which I highlight the massive budget surplus that we have this legislative session, last legislative session, quite frankly, years into the past, and the fact that a vast majority of that money is just going into government coffers for future use or current use. The spending, very, very little of this money is flowing back to average New Mexicans. Now, if I were a conspiracy theorist, which I've come to embrace conspiracy theories in many ways because they tend to be right, it seems like the idea is to keep New Mexicans poor by not bringing in economic development, money from outside New Mexico, job growth, etc. The idea is let's just keep that money close to the vest here in government and not let it flow or leak outside into the private sector economy where it might be used to grow, create jobs that are outside the purview of government officials from the governor on down. That's just a random thought, though. Wally, your take?
Well, it is interesting, Paul, that if the private sector does so well in so many things, we won't need as much government. And I do think that there are certain factions of the political class that like it that way. They like dependent voters because that may be their constituency, and they kind of get things going. The problem is that with government, it's amazing, and I would. That's one of those. I'm trying to think of a great example, but I would. The exception to the rule is where is it that governments that continue to grow larger and larger and larger do the people prosper more? There is certainly a limit to the size of government that's appropriate, and beyond that, which I think we've gotten beyond that in the state of New Mexico, we've certainly gotten beyond that at the federal level. It actually reduces the quality of life and hurts people, not help them.
Yeah, totally concur. And again, we'll keep saying it. New Mexicans hold the future in their hands. The 112 members of the legislature are up for election this November. If people want to pursue a different path that empowers people, that makes New Mexico an economic dynamo rather than an economic laggard with the third highest poverty rate in the nation, while government continues to get bigger and bigger and grow its pool of assets, regardless of what we have here in the private sector, we can do that. So check out that piece at National Review. We also posted it at Heirs of Enchantment and riograndefoundation.org. Continuing with our positive media week, while we are recording this one day past the infamous date, a date which will live in infamy, at least as far as I'm concerned, in New Mexico history, March 11th, 2020, when the governor decided to put New Mexico into a public health emergency to address the effects of COVID-19. This led us down, 3 years plus of emergencies. Ultimately put us back in an emergency. I think she got a taste of unilateral power and decided, I kind of like that, and then did that for guns as well. We're still under a public health emergency on the gun issue. But I made a case in this opinion piece that was more focused on New Mexico media outlets that hey, the legislature has got to get itself together, Democrat, Republican, whoever it may be. We cannot move forward as a state with one person having the ability to declare an emergency and keep a state in an emergency for over 3 years. It was unscientific and it was an abject failure from a, limiting the spread, limiting the harms of COVID. In fact, it multiplied the harms of COVID-19. What the governor did.
Yeah, it was a I don't know. It was the world's longest and slowest train wreck COVID policy in New Mexico for the impacts it had. And as you say, these emergencies, during the middle of COVID, as Paul, you were highlighting the issue about, well, if we can continue the emergency indefinitely here, what other emergencies could they have? Again, not to say the Babylon Bee effect, where you bring up something that's somewhat an idea that you think is so outlandish it hopefully would never happen, and then it does. That's what's happened. And so, what other emergencies can we have? And again, it's used inappropriately. It's just I don't know, it seems like it's the most undemocratic form. It's a very dictatorial form of governance if these are not challenged. And it's clear that when you look at these laws, they're like, okay, they're for a very brief period of time, and then and then they could be extended, but they were to deal with things like outbreaks of infectious disease, and then to expand them. So what else can we have? We can have the fossil fuel emergency, the energy emergency, the homeless emergency, and we certainly now have the gun emergency, although it doesn't seem like we care much about the crime emergency, just the guns part of it. And so, yeah, it just can be a way to have the executive branch of government just do things that are not laws enacted by the legislature. And it's one of those, it's maybe old fashioned of me, Paul, but I do remember eighth grade civics about the three separate branches of government and their roles and responsibilities. And the quote unquote executive order, or the roll of quarters and a yellow pad and a pen to implement laws and regulations that legislatures wouldn't pass, are certainly not contemplated at the federal or state level. But we sure have a lot of that going on these days.
Yeah, and just on the COVID issue itself, New Mexico's lockdown heavy strategy failed. We had the third highest death per million. Now, this is not the uh, over and above. This is just the COVID death rate by world O-meters, which we used consistently throughout COVID-19 and the pandemic. Arizona did have the very highest COVID death rate. Oklahoma was 16th, Texas 27th, Colorado 41st, and Utah was 50th. So they had second best. They looked at the District of Columbia as well at Worldometers. So, but we also sent our kids into dead last place academically in the nation, killed a lot of businesses. All we're asking for is for the governor to be held accountable, both in terms of the duration, so having the legislature vote to continue an emergency, and unfortunately, probably this current Democrat legislature would probably be a rubber stamp, but at least they have to have hearings and have discussions on some of the data, and they haven't always been a rubber stamp. So just to be clear, I think the legislature would at least have some useful informational hearings about what is happening at the state level in a COVID crisis or another crisis in the future, including the gun issue, because we are currently under this gun public health emergency, and we just had a legislative session, and certainly the legislature, Democrat dominated as they may be, did not just blindly go with the governor and her anti-gun measures. So at times the legislature can and will stand up to the governor, but if they don't even give themselves a chance and push back on these public health emergencies, they are going to kind of just be irrelevant.
Yes, and that is a good point. Their power wanes under this approach. And, one of the things about the legislature is even when, in my opinion, they go the wrong way, when something goes through the legislative process, in most cases. Now, during COVID, no. During the Zoom session that we had, they just passed stuff. There was no debate. It was like the fix was in. But just to use this last session as an example, most of the issues, even those that I think were incorrect, received a level of debate, and so that the issues are brought forward. And I do think that's healthy. And as you say, if there's no legislative touch point for these emergency measures, that never happens because the only debate is debate over the Facebook, briefing about why the debate, or excuse me, why the emergency continues, which is what happened during COVID, month after month after month.
Yeah. Well, my next story for discussion is the situation with nominating candidates for public office for the legislature. Had a very interesting experience last Friday. As folks may be aware, especially those more politically engaged, the candidates for especially legislature, but state and local offices that will be, in primaries this summer and then in the general election in November, you have to get a certain number of signatures in order to appear on the ballot. And I was attempting to sign a nominating petition for a candidate running for the state Senate in my part of Albuquerque. Went online, and I think it's a great idea. It's a good concept for a variety of reasons, but now you can do this electronically. So if you're looking to run, you can get your signatures online, or if you are looking to sign for somebody, you can sign the petition online, and that also helps with the verification process because previously, and you can still do this, you walk around with a piece of paper and you have to get signatures and they can be illegible and people don't know what district they're in, this, that, and the other thing. So the online setup is a good idea. Well, I try to log in and it immediately says the system rejects me outright and just says that I cannot do this. And it not even for that district.
No soup for you,
Exactly.
Paul.
It wasn't even about the district. It was just like I couldn't get into the system. So I call a phone number at the top of the State Secretary of State's website and get somebody, believe it or not, right away on the phone and explain the situation to them. They check it out for themselves. They agree that there is a problem, that they get the same result. And then about an hour or so later, call me back and say, hey, it looks like there was a duplicate voter registration under your name that was not active. And so it was clearly not a viable voter registration, but it was enough to get me booted out of the system. They said, we're going to have to handle this with the county and work through the process. We will get back to you in very soon. And I was continuing to do my thing, work, etc. And believe it or not, within an hour and a half, 2 hours, I got a call back saying the situation was resolved and I was able to go online. I kept them on the phone. I said, I want to make sure this works for 100%. So I did it. And sure enough, it did work. So on one hand, voter rolls cleaned up could be a helpful part of this whole situation. I've heard that other people have had issues, including somebody who was named as a candidate for U.S. Senate who did not run as a U.S. Senate candidate and was frustrated by that. But there are definitely bugs in the system. However, I encourage folks to use the system to get people nominated to be on the ballot because generally speaking, I support having more rather than fewer candidates. And it's something that I think is very user-friendly and simple if it does work correctly.
Well, Paul, I am 1 for 2 with the system. The first one was sent to me. Would you nominate this candidate? I clicked on the link that they were sent to me, took me to the Secretary of State's website, and in a matter of 30 seconds, I had completed the process. Another candidate sent me a link a few days later, and I was like, okay, and I knew this candidate. I was comfortable doing it, so went through the same thing, clicked on the link, took me there. Nothing. It just didn't work.
Huh.
So, and all I did was let that candidate know, is like, hey, I would like to do this online. I've done it before, but for some reason it's not working. You might check it out. And that one's still on hold. So again, I'm 50%, and when it worked well, it worked very well, very expeditious. So hopefully they'll get the bugs out of that, and it'll work even more often.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's a great mechanism and something that is worth having in place for a variety of reasons, including ultimately making the petition nominating process more secure and more reliable. Uh, 4 days school weeks, yet again in the news. So again, I mentioned that Wednesday was the signing deadline for the governor. We knew that her priorities included 5-day school weeks and mandating that. The budget that passed the legislature, again, with strong bipartisan support in the House in a floor vote, as well as in the Senate, which adopted it without any question, basically put a prohibition on the governor implementing the 5-day school week mandate with funds appropriated in the budget. Of course, we have a line item veto, and more discussion of that in a moment.
Mhm.
But the governor first line item vetoed the uh, the legislature's prohibition on forcing the 5-day school week, and then she issued her regulations, which you could squint and call it a compromise. I would call it the governor doing some window dressing to make it look like she's not just ramming this home and giving her the ability to say that she's trying to improve student outcomes. Basically, it requires some very aggressive achievement goals, either 85th percentile or above for student performance in the districts continuing the 4-day school week, or some aggressive growth measures, which I'm all for student growth, but you know, telling you could mandate, Wally. I think this is a fabulous idea. This will solve all the problems. All public schools need to increase student performance by 20% annually every year for the next 5 years.
So it has been written, so it shall be done.
This is basically what the governor's
Yeah,
doing.
if that's all it took, that would
Yeah.
be great. So, yes, that 85th percentile and above, wow, that's you're going to have to really do a great job. And I would not, I would not put it past some of those small rural districts to be able to achieve that. But that's a mighty high standard indeed. So,
Yeah, so the governor has kind of put her stamp on that discussion, and we'll see if there's legal actions taken by some of these rural school districts. Again, the district level and school board level versus statewide central control is one of the great ongoing battles when it comes to New Mexico's schools, and that specifically is the rural districts, and we saw that quickly go back in time. Floyd Public Schools on the mask mandate. The governor allowed that mask mandate to linger and stick around for a very long time, and ultimately it wound up in the courts. I think it's safe to say that Floyd Public Schools were correct. The governor was wrong on masks. They never did a darn thing, and certainly not in public schools for 7-8 hours a day. But this governor does not care about rural New Mexico at all. That is fundamentally clear. And she really doesn't care about anybody having a check or balance against her at all. It's simply my way or the highway. And it will be interesting to see what happens in this ongoing 4-day versus 5-day a week saga relating to the school weeks.
Yes, and so Paul, from a strategic point of view, the education department in New Mexico and the governor are certainly putting a lot of eggs into the 5-day school week as well as the 180-day instructional period. And maybe there's some other things that are going, but it seems like, boy, they're putting a lot of their capital into that. Now, will that be enough to change things in a system that overall has really been suffering? I'm not really sure that's the case. So it's one of those, if we're dead last and the full 180 days of instruction adds whatever 5 7 10 days to a bad instructional system. And the other thing that New Mexico is seeing is, and students who are truant who don't come to school, is that really going to make a difference? I'm not so sure. So this will be one that's interesting to watch. This seems like this may be a petard that they need to watch out for, because people are starting to notice, and it's becoming common, is why are we last in education? And that's something that I used to not hear many people talking about outside of this podcast or within the political class, but that is a topic for people just talking out in public now.
Yeah, and it's never been our viewpoint that somehow the 4-day week is a massive, improver of educational outcomes. The governor also has no data showing that 4-day weeks drive them lower. So it's kind of not really about outcomes. It's much more about philosophically local control. It's about what districts say that they can actually recruit and maintain and retain teachers. It's a popular policy with students, parents, and educators and administrators alike. It cuts down on commute times for that 5th day of the week. It allows appointments to be made and taken care of on that Friday, presumably.
It's green.
It is green, yeah. And it just seems, again, inconsistent. The only thing consistent is the governor likes to get her own way and impose rules on an arbitrary basis. If you were actually to presume that she cared about the green energy sort of thing, because having those buses out on the roads, it doesn't matter if they're electric buses or diesel buses or whatever.
It takes energy.
It takes energy, and also lighting the schools, heating the schools. Those things take energy as well on those days when the kiddos are around. It's just absolutely mind-bending, mind-blowing. But we know the governor cares first and foremost about her own power. And that is a trend that seems to be moving to other statewide constitutional officers. I'm referring now to the land commissioner, Stephanie Garcia Richard, who did not care for the results of the legislative session and them not giving her a higher royalty payment rate that she could impose. The bill, HB 48, passed through the House, but died before it was considered in the Senate, which is kind of the opposite of most of the big bills that happen. But no increase in royalty payments from 20 to 25%. Garcia Richards seems to believe that Texas public policies are wonderful to adopt when they result in higher taxes. But of course, we're not going to talk about the gross receipts tax and how much that impacts the oil and gas industry. So Garcia Richard has decided that she is not going to lease any lands that she believes would be eligible or able to garner that 25% rate. So she's seemingly kind of pushing back against her fiduciary responsibility. She's also trying to, it looks like, really hold a gun to the head of the legislature and say, give me my policy or I'm just not going to lease these lands out. And, I'm no election expert, Wally, but after a red wave that wasn't last time around, I'm feeling that this may be more of a red wave election, or at least a election that sees the Republicans make inroads into the Democrat majorities. Uh, she's not going to have a better legislature, I don't think, after this year. It's hard to see how this legislature moves further to the left and further into her camp in terms of higher taxes on oil and gas. But that's the bet she's making. So I think it's going to be very interesting to watch what the land commissioner does and if she eventually backs away from this policy.
Yeah, and just a couple of things. One is when you lease these parcels, it's a competitive bid process, and the oil and gas industry bids an amount of money, and so a good tract of land will garner millions and millions of dollars, where a bad tract of land will garner just a few dollars. And if it's bad enough, no one will even bid, and that will not be that parcel of land won't be developed in any way, shape, or form. And so there's already that piece in play. And then the other thing is that uh, it's not proven, but I would just go back to our to my newfound friend, and I was so glad to finally learn more about this. Art Laffer, where just because you raise a rate of a tax doesn't mean you get more income, and oil and gas royalties are very much a tax. But the key is so if the percent is higher on a long-term basis, will the amount they receive for the initial, the initial bid process be lower, and which will be enough, which will carry the day? We don't know that, by the way. We certainly don't. And this is one of those things that, again, I would just point back to the fact that when you raise a rate, you always don't raise revenue. Sometimes it just makes it less economical, and you actually get less revenue, not more revenue, from such a plan. And just a final point, you didn't ask, but I want to say New Mexico is hugely important now to the federal situation. We're such a big producer, and now when we talk about gasoline prices going up and oil prices and everything, we are the number two producer. We're significant, and the way things are going in the world, shipping's getting harder, imports and exports. This state is going to have a lot to say about the energy situation in New Mexico in terms of what the price of gasoline is, and whether we go into energy related recessions or anything else. We're going to be right there. Maybe a few years ago when we were, third, fourth, or fifth producer, it would be different. But now we are right there, right behind Texas, and not right behind Texas, but we are significant, and we're a huge player that people look to what's going on in New Mexico for international oil prices. We've risen to that point.
Yeah, especially in the Permian Basin. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if Garcia Richard keeps this kind of ban, if you will, in place, and how long it's in place, and you know whether she does somehow get what she wants. But that's going to be again driven by the entire 112 member legislature, and it's obviously it is axiomatic in New Mexico politics that the legislature can always get worse. But I think they've been.
I know when you said that, I was just like, oh my goodness, where's a board that I can knock on wood, because it could become more progressive. So
Yeah, but the likelihood seems to be that it's going to move in the opposite direction, and that means less of a chance of higher taxes on oil and gas. Uh, Running through an issue quickly, did a records request for from Bernalillo County on electric vehicles, and I think this really points to the lie of that these things are somehow affordable. Uh, I'm going to give the level of charging station and then the price and how many charging areas or charging units this qualifies for. So can it charge two vehicles at once, etc. So at Alvarado Square, Bernalillo County has requested a federal grant to put a level three charger, the highest level. This addition and upgrade over the existing charger is estimated to cost $875,000. Again, this is simply reporting public records requests from the county. And if you would like to see a copy of the records request, we can get that for you. Info@riograndefoundation.org. Uh, a level one charge, so one level two charger with 2 ports at Los Padillas Community Center, costing $64,793. The total project, and again, this is left to not fully be defined. Is this involving tearing up a parking lot? Is this just a new transformer or some new electrical equipment? But this project totaling $457,751, uh, or $457,751. Sorry. Uh, One level two charger with 2 ports, Los Vecinos Community Center, $97,190. Project totaling $222,692. One level two charger with 2 ports at Paradise Hills Community Center, $80,992. Project totaling $394,964. A level two charger with dual ports at Westside Community Center, estimated at $80,992. Project totaling $470,451. Wally, those are expensive charging stations.
Can I just say, wow? Two things. The chargers aren't that expensive, but when you put into the total cost of the project, installation and everything else, we're looking at regularly here in this list, $200,000, $250,000 per charging port. That's a lot of money. That is a lot of money.
And something I commented on and think about is, what is the project cost? What does that entail? I'm assuming it largely is upgrades to the electrical kind of system they have on site there, and perhaps even electrical grid enhancements for the substations in the area to handle the need for energy. And that's going to be a huge issue. Maybe.
Well, and I don't know, it could. I'm not saying
Okay.
it does or doesn't. I'm thinking, just from what I've seen about these, that's just the engineering and all of the equipment necessary to put the charger, a housing, to
Sure.
do the paving, etc. Keep in mind that we're a little Davis-Bacon
There you go.
state, so we will pay the highest construction costs that are out there in the marketplace on these things. So yeah, that will be something that's definitely interesting to look at. The fact that they're only adding a couple, maybe it is, maybe it is, but a lot of times, just as we see now, if the feeder system into a neighborhood is unable to receive the power from a solar, you can't sign up for P&Ms. It's going to be interesting to see where our electric system out in these areas, because the key to community centers and places like this is they're not always right there in the industrial park area where there may be quite a bit of power. They're out there in neighborhoods where they're kind of designed to a level, and if you're going to be doubling the amount of power, it could run into some shortcomings. So that's going to be interesting to see. But man, that's a lot of money just in a very, very few charging ports.
Yeah, no doubts. Also relating to mobility and potentially the lack thereof, the Biden administration has pushed a regulation that would allow what is being called a kill switch, presumably to be controlled by some government officials, probably a local government official. Recently, Representative Thomas Massey in Washington, he's represented from Kentucky, offered an amendment in Congress to eliminate said kill switch, but it was not adopted. So the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration collected public comments on the issue. The Rio Grande Foundation submitted public comments. That period has been closed, but it's obviously a big brotherish and very scary proposition that you would have some government official potentially in charge of just turning a switch and stopping your vehicle in short order. Now, the idea is, and Ben Ray Lujan, by the way, Senator Ben Ray Lujan has really been if you want to say, leader on this kill switch issue. He's been supportive of implementing this kill switch idea. Obviously, drunk driving is a huge issue. There's all kinds of concerns about people behind the wheel. We just saw a report saying that Albuquerque had the very worst drivers in the nation. Uh, but the idea of putting a government official in charge of potentially just stopping your car on the middle of the road is not something I am excited about. We need better enforcement mechanisms. We need to be more responsible as human beings, and for that to be impressed upon folks. But uh, this kill switch idea is not good, and we provided public comments in opposition to it.
Well, yeah, Paul, it does bring up a lot of issues. Is that mistakes are made? I think back a couple of years when there was a huge warning put out in Hawaii that doom was imminent, and then it was a false positive. And then when they had the huge fires, the warning system didn't work. Well, yeah, it's the technology is one level and the people are another. Also, you can, and it's not that hard to do, put a Faraday cage around an antenna and keep a signal from going. So there'll have to be another level of, if this were to go into place, is that you are prohibited from having your car be off the grid, for example. So it's very interesting, and believe me, I guess, am I right that this is designed if a cop sees someone that they're, instead of doing a chase, they're able to turn their car off, remotely?
That would seem to be a logical.
Yeah, well, is that what we're doing? But, also, what if we have that energy emergency and we turn off a third of the cars every 3 days, and so you can't drive? That's something that and again, not to be the Babylon Bee, but you hate to bring these ideas even up because, as far fetched as they are, it seems like amazing amounts of them go into effect and are implemented. So,
Yeah, implementation is definitely a key criticism, key part of the opposition here for us to this kind of policy initiative. So something to keep an eye on as the regulatory process moves forward. Now,
and one other thing,
sure.
Paul, this system will be unhackable.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
the minute it goes into place, we'll have TikTok videos within a week showing how to hack this. And so not only can law enforcement turn off your vehicles, is people who are looking to steal from you or do other nefarious purposes will likely be able to do that as well within a very short period of time.
Yeah. Now, a few kind of a bit of a lightning round here. The Laken Riley Act, which mandates that immigration authorities detain non-citizens charged with crimes, that was passed in the House on bipartisan support, but all three of New Mexico's Democrats in Washington, Stansbury, Leger Fernandez, and Gabe Vasquez voted no on that. That is quite the fascinating vote to take, especially for Leger Fernandez and Vasquez. Vasquez being most notable because he's in such a tough race against Yvette Harrell. But the idea that you're unwilling to detain non-citizens charged with crimes seems pretty basic. Our thing is not immigration necessarily at the Rio Grande Foundation, but it certainly is crime. Everybody should be concerned about crime, and it's very interesting. That and Biden walking back, calling the killer illegal, is certainly highlighting where the Democratic Party is these days on these issues.
Yeah, and Paul, when it comes to like the congressional delegation from New Mexico, their votes, their election comes from the voters in New Mexico, but it seems like increasingly their money to run their campaign comes from outside of New Mexico. And so who are their constituents in that case? It seems like you have your real constituents in terms of the voters, but then you have your money constituents. And I don't know, it just seems like the three Congress people that we have in New Mexico right now definitely are not that close to the beliefs and feelings of most New Mexicans on some issues like this. So that's I could be wrong. I haven't seen polling on that, but that doesn't seem like that's too controversial an issue to say that if somebody is in our country illegally and they've been charged with a felony, that there's some actions that could and should result.
Yeah. Now, I yearn for the day when New Mexico is as conservative as San Francisco. Can you believe that?
Oh my goodness. What do we
So,
got going there?
San Francisco voters recently overwhelmingly adopted Proposition F, which will require single adults on city welfare to be screened for drug use. Uh, Strikes me as something that could or should be done here in Albuquerque or New Mexico. If you're living on the taxpayer dime, you should not be subsidized for your drug use. San Francisco voters may have had enough with regard to outrageous crime and rampant homelessness. That election happened last week, and certainly is interesting, and I highly recommend. I think it's a great debate to have and a great issue to talk about for more conservative or even moderate Democrats to say, hey, we need to be as conservative as San Francisco. In another other state, Texas has had an ongoing effort to bring school choice to its citizens. It's been a challenge, and there's been Republicans in Texas in the legislature who were put there with the help of the teachers' unions. There were 16 of them targeted in primary races. Only 6 of them survived outright. 6 lost outright. 4 were forced into May 28th runoff. So beating incumbents in any race is very difficult, and this gives Greg Abbott, the governor, I think, an opportunity in the next round when his legislature convenes again. They only do every 2 years in Texas, so I don't even know when that would be. But New Mexico could be facing yet another neighbor with a very open school choice situation in the not too distant future. And Abbott, I think, is burnishing his credentials, quite frankly, for a run for the White House with this potential victory. And obviously, he needs to get that to the finish line, but also with his handling of the border crisis with vis-a-vis the Biden administration and really standing firm on that. And then finally, in economic news, the term shrinkflation was used during the State of the Union address. Shrinkflation, for those who do not know, is when a company responding to inflationary pressures or cost increases of a given product, they tend to kind of keep the packaging the same size, but shrink the amount of product available in the package. It's a way of cutting costs without being overt about increasing prices. Biden has been on a kick about shrinkflation, which it resulted in him specifically calling out Snickers, part of the M&M Mars family, which issued a statement. We have not reduced the size of Snickers singles or share size in the U.S. Like many industries, we continue to face high inflation and spikes in material costs. However, we work to absorb these extra costs wherever possible to provide affordable treats and the best value. Final prices are at the discretion of the retailer. So, fact check false for the president. Of course, any legitimate. The fact checking industry seems to have dried up with the advent of the Biden administration, because you could have driven a tractor trailer, a train, and the Concorde through several of the holes in Biden's story during his State of the Union address, but I didn't hear a single fact check, unlike back in the Trump administration.
Yeah, very, very good point. And yes, shrinkflation, it's a real thing. It happens.
Absolutely.
It happens. He maybe didn't do his homework and pick the right product. The other thing is shrinkflation. Where does that come from? And when does that happen? It happens when there's inflation going on. And what are we having in our country that even makes this an issue is he's trying to deflect the frustration that people are feeling with inflation What goes not as far because it is shrunk is the value of a dollar. That's what inflation is reducing the purchasing power. And that's really where it comes from. And so, guess what? Paul, did we ever hear a thing about this when inflation was 1 or 2%? And I'll give you the answer. I sure didn't. I don't think that was much of an issue. But when it gets to be where it is now, and then food inflation and energy inflation, things people really notice, it's on the top of mind, people, because it's causing real issues for families.
Yeah, well, we will leave it there. It was a very busy week for a lot of the things that we talk about here on Tipping Point, New Mexico. So thank you all for tuning in, and thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.